Hi, welcome to Long Beach City College's Film Faculty Panel. My name is Michael Roberts. I'm a film major here at Long Beach City College, and I'll be your Master of Ceremonies today. Now, before we get started, our wonderful studio audience, please take the time to write down any questions you may have for our wonderful panelists today. We'll get to them later. First up, please welcome Professor Erik Martinez. He teaches screenwriting and film studies here at Long Beach City College, as well as Southern New Hampshire University. He has a BA in film studies from UCSB and an MFA in screenwriting from Chapman University. He's been a professional screenwriter for over a decade. He started his career collaborating with Hong Kong director Choi Kirk-Wong on several script projects, including an unproduced remake of the cult classic Five Deadly Venoms for Celestial Pictures. How are you doing today, Professor Martinez?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Getting a little shaky, but we'll get through it. Yeah. Now, you have an extensive list of works that you've written, and many of them have screened in festivals like Beyond the Mat, Comfort, as well as Chung Ku Ma, and recently the Panama Unit. Now, that's a lot of work to organize, and I'm wondering, what do you think is the best tool for experienced and novice screenwriters?
Tool as far as?
Like the one thing that every screenwriter should have.
A good pen.
A good pen and a good notebook?
Good pen, good notebook, or, a good tablet or a good computer. Because, you're going to have to organize all that stuff in, one way, shape, or form or another, so, yeah.
Just always carry it around with you?
Always.
Okay.
I usually carry at least 2-3 pens with me at any given time, and a couple of notebooks and either a tablet or my laptop, so, yeah.
Okay. I'll keep a notebook with me. Now, next up, Dr. Alison Hoffman, current head of the film department here at Long Beach City College and our film club advisor. Alison Hoffman-Han is an assistant professor of film studies in the Department of Visual and Media Arts. She teaches courses in cinema history and aesthetics, documentary, cultural studies, and global film cultures. She earned her PhD in cinema and media studies from UCLA. How are you doing today, Dr. Hoffman?
I'm doing great.
That's good to hear. Are you ready to teach our wonderful audience and answer some of our questions?
Absolutely. I'm going to do my best.
All right. Now, your work has been widely published in the Journal of Japanese and Korean Cinema, Film Quarterly, There She Goes, Feminist Filmmaking and Beyond, Billy Wilder, Movie Maker, and Star Bodies and the Erotics of Suffering. So your work has more a theory side and analytical side of the film industry. How does that differ from the production side of filmmaking?
Well, I am not doing any kind of production, really. Back in my graduate school days, I made some films here and there, but primarily I am a film historian. So just like a literature professor, someone with their PhD in English maybe is studying literature, novels, poetry. That's kind of what I'm doing with film. So I'm really digging into the history, but also, dabbling here and there with theory in what's called media industry studies as well, where you're looking critically at various industrial practices, including production culture.
So you look at more of the bigger picture of the film industry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Next up, we have Professor David Parrish, LBCC cinematography instructor. For over 35 years, David Parrish has worked as a cinematographer, camera operator, and camera assistant with both film and digital cameras on a variety of projects that took him all around the world. He is a member of the International Cinematographers Guild, the Society of Camera Operators, and the Digital Cinema Society. So, Professor Parrish, I know you've worked on many films such as Beetlejuice, The Notebook, Star Trek TV shows, commercials for Coca-Cola, Apple, Disneyland, and music videos for Michael Jackson, Pat Benatar, Prince, and Maroon 5, and many more. Now, what is it like to work with an extensive list of stars, A-list celebrities, that top tier?
The best part for production crew is that you usually have a little bit more money to spend on the production. Sometimes some of the stars are really nice to work with. Others are okay. But Generally, when you have the bigger stars and your productions, you've got a bigger budget, which means you get to spend more time lighting, you get to have better sets, you get better locations, and time. Money buys you time, which on a low-budget film, you don't have a lot of that. So you can be more creative.
That's good to know. And I forgot to ask you, how are you doing today?
Excellent. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. All right. So I hear this is the first time you've all met each other. Is it? Or am I?
The first time I've met Erik.
I think it's the
but,
first time the first time I've met Parrish and Dr. Hoffman. So,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. I hope you've all read each other's IMDb page before this, so you get all on the same level.
Memorized it.
Yeah.
So just once again, I'd like to thank you all for coming in and answering our questions. I hope we can get some valuable information today. So this is our first question is from Tyler from Facebook to Professor Martinez. What can an up-and-coming screenwriter to expect to be doing once out of school? What are the steps that should be taken to jumpstart their careers outside of school?
What can they expect? They can expect nothing. If all they're doing is sitting around and expecting something, they can expect nothing. But if you get out there and you hustle, you meet people, network, whether it's through contests or just going to events in LA or film festivals, meetups. I know Long Beach has their acting and film association. Obviously, we have the film club here. So I think if you're hustling, you're networking, you're kind of just creating this nice sort of world for your work to kind of go out to. On top of that, you'd probably want to find a job. Ideally, doing something in the film industry, and most likely it's probably going to be some kind of PA or intern or something to that regard. But if you want to be a screenwriter, you definitely want to find a job or some kind of work that offers some flexibilities to give you that time to write. Because if you're a screenwriter and all you're saying is you're a screenwriter and not actually writing, then that's a big problem. And so you definitely want something that gives you that flexibility to write as much and as often as possible. You definitely should expect to be doing homework for the rest of your life as a screenwriter, which I'm sure you know is one of my students. So you're going to be researching, you're going to be reading, you're going to be reading tons of scripts, tons of books, and just making your way through that. And above all else, you just got to be passionate when you're out there. Be passionate about the work, the writing. Don't go into it for the money or the fame or anything like that. You want to go into it because you have a story to tell and you want to do something with that story. So, yeah.
Okay. So stay busy and just keep putting yourself out there.
Yeah,
no matter
what. Putting yourself out there, meeting people. But, it's a balance between putting yourself out there and also giving yourself the time to create.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's good insight.
Yeah, thank you.
This question was emailed from J.D.A. for Professor Hoffman. In Western action hero movies, many happy endings usually consist of the make hero ending up with the woman. In Romeo Must Die and in a few other ones, with an Asian male protagonist, they do not kiss the girl at the end. Is this because in Asia they do not portray women as a prize to be won, or is it a form of emasculation? Or is it also more of a cultural difference?
Well, there's actually a name for this that the Asian American historian David Ng coined, and it's called racial castration. And this has been happening with representations of Asian and Asian American men in particular since the silent era. So even going back to a film like D.W. Griffith's Broken Blossoms, which is a romance between a 20-something-year-old Chinese man and a 13-year-old young girl. Kind of a shocking but wildly popular movie back in 1919. You have that same kind of dynamic. It's erotic, but ultimately the relationship is never sealed with a kiss, as it were. The film that's referenced in this question, Romeo Must Die, was kind of a big deal when it came out. I think in the late 90s. It starred Aaliyah and Jet Li. and had a romantic kind of buddy plot, if you will, between the two, but they danced together and they hugged, but they never kiss. Similarly, there was a film with the Chinese star Chow Yun-fat and Mira Sorvino, a white American actress, The Replacement Killers in the 90s, where it was the same dynamic. So yeah, racial castration, where Asian and Asian American men are just not given the same kind of masculinity, or they ultimately don't really get the girl.
Mm-hmm.
As I was saying, this is tied to history. So it goes back to things like, the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 19-teens. But thinking about Hollywood history, the place to really look is the Motion Picture Production Code of 1934, which institutionalized these kinds of racist representational practices. So the production code was basically the censorship machinery that, it was set in stone in Hollywood for, at least until the mid-1950s. And one of the rules in the Motion Picture Production Code was no miscegenation. And miscegenation is code for racial mixing. Mm-hmm. So basically, if there was a film where you had a romantic relationship, specifically between a white woman and a man of color, that was the biggest concern, because this was the U.S., right, mm-hmm. in 1934, when it was first instituted. You just couldn't show it. Mm-hmm. So
heavily censored.
Right. There's been a perseverance to that history, which we still really haven't seen it all that much change. I mean, you have an actor like John Cho, who's somewhat popular, but even the TV show Selfie that he was in, which was a romantic relationship between, a Korean American man and a white woman, it was canceled after a season.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. This one is from David over on our Instagram for Professor Parrish. What are some ways to cheaply increase the production value on small budget / indie films?
Best way is through the look. Try to get camera movements in there, play foreground, play with your set dressing that you have. On low budgets, be very careful on how you select your locations that you'll be able to shoot all day. If you've got one location that you're going to be in, it's got a big window, guess what? The sun moves, so that light's going to change through the day. So maybe, have some shades on there or some blinds or something like that, or choose not to shoot that, or have it very specific times when you shoot that. So it's a lot of choices visually, and if you can, with low budgets, you can do things with costuming sometimes. Acting's really important. But visually, I teach using a lot of foreground, get depths in the shots and movements like that. And those things usually don't cost a lot of money. And again, as I said before, time is money. So you don't have a lot of time. So pre-production, prep, being ready and having alternatives if things don't work out. Because I don't know if you're familiar with Murphy's Law, which is whatever can go wrong will. Murphy loves the film industry. So be covered that you have other options. And, from all my years working in film, like Beetlejuice and things like that, some of the best things that ended up in the final cut weren't planned. They were an accident, or they were something that the director or the DP or the actors saw an opportunity to take advantage of. They shot it and it worked, and it was important parts of the film. So you have to be open. You can't be structured in the sense that you need to have this form of where you're going with the film, how it's going to put together. But if it doesn't work out or some other opportunity presents itself, grab it.
So just know your set and everything that you're shooting beforehand, like the ins and out, what's going to be happening, and just be loose with it.
Yeah, be loose with it. Try to anticipate what problems might arise and have a solution for them. And it's prep. Really understand your story. Story is the most important part. You know, you can have the lowest budget film in the world. If it's got a dynamite story that's going to grab the audience, and, you know, the film may be 3 master shots, that's it. But if you got a story that knocks them dead, you got a movie. You're in film festivals.
That's really interesting. I'll have to do that for my next project. This one comes from David over on our Instagram for Professor Hoffman and Martinez. What are the biggest issues when it comes to the portrayal of women and men in film? What do you think should be implemented to revert some of these issues? What are some better examples to fix this?
Well,
it's a big one.
I can start it off
Yeah,
with just
please.
some stats.
Yeah.
There's a really excellent study that the USC Annenberg Foundation put out a couple of years ago called 900 Popular Films Examining Gender, Race, Ethnicity, LGBT, and Disability from 2007 to 2016. So they looked at 900 Hollywood films within that period, and alarmingly found that there was no change for female characters since 2007 up until 2016 in terms of just numbers of women on the screen. So still, in 2016, only 30% of speaking roles are women's roles. And 70% of all characters within that period, 900 movies, 70% were white characters. So those are revealing statistics, to be sure. There's a couple things that are quick and easy, kind of representational tools, I think, when you're trying to examine a film in a way to determine whether or not, is this a good movie when it comes to female representation or representations of people of color. The first tool, it's called the Bechdel test, and this was first coined in 1985 by this cartoonist, Alison Bechdel, and here's what it is. So 3 things. Number 1, are there at least 2 women with speaking parts in the film? Do they have names? And number 3, do they talk to each other about anything other than a man? Okay, so if a film kind of passes those 3 rules, it passes the Bechdel test, but it tells you that, okay, these female characters maybe have a little bit of depth. Similarly, the New York Times film critic Manohla Dargis came up with what she calls the DuVernay test, which is about, or based around Ava DuVernay, the African-American female director who did Selma and A Wrinkle in Time and The 13th. And there's just one rule for this one. Do the black characters or the other characters of color on screen have fully realized lives rather than serve as scenery for the white actors? So that's, I think, an even better question, really. That's getting at just the overall complexity of the characters.
Just think about how your characters interact with the world, and do you use them as props or do you use them as actual characters?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think because most of my work has been indie films and foreign films, and I have studied some Asian American cinema and Latin Chicano American cinema and stuff like that. So thinking about it in those regards, I just kind of think about the complexity of your characters, and representation matters. Obviously, we need more women in positions of power, and I think that's finally starting to happen little by little, even more so now because we've had such a light shed on these things in the last basically 6 months to a year. But then not only that, but also people of color, having people of color in more positions of power and positions where they can make these kinds of choices to have diverse voices. whether it's male or female, Latino, Black, Asian, LGBTQ, so on and so forth. One of the things I like to look at in my work and try to push and try to influence a lot in my screenwriting classes and things like that here is sort of this notion of toxic masculinity and sort of breaking it down and kind of playing up other types of masculinity that don't necessarily get the quote unquote light shown on them, because those types of things have been running, the film industry for decades. So I think when I think about it in these terms, it's about sort of kind of looking at it from a sort of film studies perspective in a way as well, and then seeing what you can do as a creator, as an artist to promote that. But not only that, it's also about, as a filmmaker, as an artist too, you need to actively promote and support films and TV shows and work by people of color, and not just your own. Like I think for me, it's not just about supporting filmmakers and films and TV shows by Latinos, which I actively do, but also, supporting films by Asian Americans and Asian filmmakers and female filmmakers and Black and African American filmmakers and so on and so forth, because it's a collective approach. Because if we're fighting all these quote unquote little battles independently, we're just going to take these incremental little steps. But if we're fighting the battle, so to speak, collectively, we're going to take much bigger steps than we would otherwise. So I think it really is kind of about sort of that representation, but also at the active sort of support. So.
Yeah, and it would also benefit you to really include a lot of people in your writing, because then you're constantly developing new ideas and you're not settling for one thing constantly.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to point out just a couple of films from the last 2 years now that have made a lot of money, and just prove that when films that have really interesting characters of color, are inclusive, diverse, feature strong women, that these films actually make a lot of money. So Girls Trip, right? Most money-making comedy of this past year, right? Get Out. Oh, yeah. Right? Also made a ton of money. And then a film that I've been showing in my class this last week, and I know you show this film too, Arrival.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
With such a complex female character and a really interesting, romantic partner, right? The male character, but who plays a supporting role. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah, and to sort of follow up on that, piggyback on that a little bit, you may laugh at this, but even a film like Fast and Furious, because its cast is so diverse, and it attracts that much more diversity in the people that go to see it. It's ridiculous and it's over the top, but I love those films for those reasons. But they are so diverse, and it's amazing. But even supporting Netflix shows that are diverse, one that kind of just flew under my radar, and I'm so grateful that I found it, is a show called On My Block, and it is hands down probably one of the best shows I've seen come out of Netflix or any streaming service in quite some time. And the writing is pretty solid, and it's just really well done. It's not a super high budget show, but it's basically about these African American and Latino kids growing up in East LA, and it's sort of this strange dramatic comedy that has these sort of tragic undertones about sort of where they live and sort of the harshness of the environment that they live in. And anyone I run into who's asking me about what are you watching now, what are you seeing now, blah, 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 I tell them they need to go see and stream on My Block, because it's amazing. And it's, those are the types of shows that everyone should be supporting, especially if they want to talk more about diversity and representation and these types of things. So, yeah.
I'd like just to add one thing as a filmmaker, not necessarily as a cinematographer. What can you guys do about this? You buy tickets, you can go to the movies. Yeah.
I feel like the best way is to simply, I guess the best way to combat this is to simply have people of different race, ethnicity, and sexualities as main characters and supporting characters. That's
Yeah, absolutely. You guys need to write the stories for the films we're going to see later. Yeah. You know, you don't have to go, if you're not a scriptwriter, you have to go all the way to the scripts, but you can write your stories, you can develop the characters, give them some history, and imagine them, and if, you guys are the future. You guys are going to really make a difference if we have a more diverse cast and more diverse stories. You guys are the stories of the future, and that's what you've got to do, even if it's just a little bit. You go home tonight and you just write a little short storyline, and you say, okay, these are my 3 characters. These may be people I knew growing up, or these are my cousins, or something like that. Develop that story a little bit. Make a little short story, and that'll help you go to the next one. And that's what's going to make a huge difference. Yeah. When you guys, they talk about having power. No, it's opportunity. To have opportunity to make the stories, to give the opportunity to other actors, other crew people. That's where I see the hope of this business. It's in the women, it's in the people of color. It's just everybody out there. You guys are here because you're interested in making movies.
And you can start by taking classes here at Long Beach City College, like Intro to Screenwriting or Cinematography or Film Studies.
Yeah, but don't even do that. Y'all got jobs. In time of your break or something, you've got a break instead of, going out and smoking a cigarette or taking a coffee or something. Just start making, that was an interesting person I served at the table or something like this. That guy really neat. That person's really interesting. I'm going to invent a history for that person.
Keep that notebook with you at all times.
You know what I got in my pocket, right, Alex? Right there. Keep it with me all the time, and I have that pen with me all the time. When I have ideas, notes, they're all in there, and I go back and forth some. So it's not just going to classes helps, but it's got to be, if this is really what you want to do, it's your life. Yep. And you've got to live it. You've got to believe it. You've got to have the courage to keep going. Otherwise, how many film schools are in Southern California? You got, the way you can be different is by you guys fighting and working hard every waking moment, and that it just improves yourself.
I'm excited for the future. Yeah, thank you.
So absolutely nothing about cinematography. No.
Well, following up on that, I was just thinking a lot of what I hear about producers is they say, well, you need a star, and usually they're thinking of a white star or a white male actor. But you were saying diversity brings in more people. So money-wise, you think they would want to do that? Do you think they're not doing it just because it's just institutionalized racism, or do you just think?
Yes, mostly.
That's it? Yeah.
And that those who have had the power to greenlight certain productions, and even within talent agencies, there's kind of a pipeline, if you will, that pushes along this kind of sameness, right? Mm-hmm. That oftentimes is very white and very male. So now with the Time's Up initiative and all kinds of interesting things that the Women in Film advocacy group is doing, and other organizations too, we are maybe going to see some real institutional change. Because while there are so many incredible, actors of color and, multi-ethnic writers, you name it, there's such a wealth of talent, but so often, that talent is not being recognized, right? Mm-hmm. Because of these power dynamics in Hollywood. So just a few things. Providing financial incentives for productions that actually do have gender parity and more inclusive cast and crews. There's a Canadian production company that's actually doing it, where if you can show that, you know, your crew is 50-50, there's parity when it comes to, you know, salaries and that sort of thing, they're offering, you know, deep discounts essentially to those kinds of productions. So that's, you know, sometimes it comes down to money. And if that's happening, I think that also could really help matters for women and people of color.
Yeah. One just to sort of piggyback off of both of what they're saying. I went to a screenwriting retreat a couple years ago where where those of us who were invited were partnered up with some high-profile sort of industry mentors. And one of my mentors, he sat me down, and you know, he's this really talented writer, and he sat me down and he was like, you know, he broke down sort of the statistics for me in terms of screenwriting representation and sort of the types of people who were being hired at that time. And this was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And he was like, and this is a white male straight guy, this is like probably late 40s, early 50s. And he was like, for people like me, like the industry is, we're solid. We're at a good point right now. He's like, for African-American writers, both men and women, things are getting a little bit better. Asian Americans are kind of right behind them a little bit. But then he looked at me and he's like, you being a Latino, Mexican-American writer, he's like, the change is so insignificant that it doesn't even matter right now. He's like, it's nothing. He's like, what do you feel about that? How do you think about that? And it really, really kind of shocked me. So kind of hearing what Professor Parrish and Hoffman are saying, you know, they're both absolutely right. It's about, you know, as he was saying to you, like, go out there and create, make stuff, write stuff. You help create those opportunities, you know, and if you're not doing it, someone else is, you know. So you have to get out there, you have to hustle, you have to do that work and create and make those opportunities. So.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And just kind of go back on what I was saying is, it's a lot cheaper to make a movie nowadays. A lot cheaper. I don't know if anybody saw it, but a movie was released last month called Unsane by Steven Soderbergh. Shot totally on an iPhone. You know, he had a professional crew. They lit it. They had good sound, the whole bit. But it was shot on one of the iPhones, or $400 or $500 or whatever, and not a $60,000 camera. So it's all possible. How much does it cost for you to write a story? Your time, and some pencils and paper. And you develop that. You develop it over time. If you're a story writer, you should have like 3 or 4 stories going in your head in different places, and you just working on it all the time. You wake up in the morning, oh yeah, this is a great thing. Yeah, Harry's going to do this now, things like that. But those are opportunities. We talked about the problems that big productions are having on getting diversity and all that sort of thing. They are improving, but it's like moving a battleship around. It's really slow to change that. But you guys can come up with a really low budget 10-minute film. Get it in the festivals. How many festivals are out there now? There's 1 million festivals. What are they looking for? They're looking for like 8, 10-minute, 12-minute films to fill the gaps between the big features. Relative budget, you could do it on a small budget, get your friends together, maybe take a year and a half to shoot it. But the opportunities are there to, yes, hopefully big movie making will eventually change, and Black Panther didn't have any stars, and I'm sure they're going to make a lot more money next time they make it. But that made a little money. So you have the opportunities to make these smaller films, which are just a stepping stone to when you get to do a bigger film.
So just keep on working and keep on hustling.
And you have to have the courage to keep it up. There's so many haters out there. There's so many people who are going to say no to you. And you got to say, okay, and you move on. You keep going. If they critique your story, they really don't like it, sit back and look at it. See if they had any good ideas there, or they were true about it. And if you think, okay, maybe they can change this character a little bit, but no, I think it's good, then say, okay, thanks for your input, and keep moving forward. But you don't give up. It's there's a quote from Obama about the Parkland kids I heard the other day. He says, "Our future is not written for us. It's written by us. So you guys are the ones that can make this happen."
That's very inspiring. Yeah, I'm excited for future TV, especially now with just Atlanta. Great show. Loving it.
And TV is getting so much like production-wise, like features now. I've worked on a lot of television too, and the pressure to make it look like a feature is really strong. You didn't have the budget. A feature you may do 3 or 4 pages of the script a day. TV, you're doing 8 to 9. Same 12, 14-hour day. TV is, it used to be a bad word, but now it's great opportunities there.
That's great. Now, moving to the next question. This one's from Cassidy from Instagram for Professor Parrish. When handing my demo reel to an industry contact, what is the difference between following up and bothering them?
Okay, I'm going to say this over and over today. Courage. Okay, you don't want to bother them. You have to remember these contacts you have. They're usually very busy people, so don't send them an email or a text that's 2 or 3 pages long. Keep it very short. You should, if you think it's a hopeful contact, you should send it something to them at least every, 2 months, 3 months, or something like that. But watch them on social media. If they have a film coming out, or if they have some sort of event, or you find out when their birthday is, or at Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever, that's a freebie. Send them a short little, Merry Christmas. Hope you're doing well. And then of course in the bottom you got your phone number, you got your, IMDb or whatever you got on there, so they remember you. Those are freebies. So don't even count that as too often. But watch them on social media. If they've got a film or commercial that's just come out, send them an email, congratulate them on them, so that, keep you fresh in the mind. But then it's a matter of courage. If you're not persistent and you don't keep up with them, where are you? It's like you've never done anything. So, if they get to a point where this person's a real pain in the, that might happen, but then you probably wouldn't have gotten a job from it anyway. But be polite, be short, and don't worry about, don't harass them, but look for the freebies. Take advantage of all those freebies to contact them.
Okay. So like what Professor Martinez said, do the homework.
Yeah, you're always doing homework. You're always working. You're always working on your career, what you're going to do next, and try to set things up. I don't want to go on and on, but what I tell my students is to make it in the film business, it's who you know and be at the right place at the right time. Okay, who do you know in the film business here? Look to your right, look to your left. You guys are all going to be making movies, right? There's a start. Keep in contact. Be in the right place at the right time. That's like getting your resume out to everybody, every opportunity. Say, oh, I'm going to be a director. So you take a shot, you take a job as a PA. You learn things. You work as hard as you can. You be the best PA that's there. If you work really hard on the set, guess what? Other crew people are going to notice that, and they're going to say, no, I don't want this person getting bottles of water. I want her to be working in the camera department. You move up. They notice you. If you are there and working hard, you get noticed and you move up. So that's the same thing. If you're serious about this, and if you're going to succeed, you have to be. And you have to do everything. And so being in the right place at the right time is like roulette at Vegas. If you got your chip on all those numbers, you got a better chance of one of them hitting, right? Mm-hmm. So get out there.
Thank you. This next question's from Facebook. It's from Nano for everyone. How has the mise-en-scene of dread in the horror genre evolved? It sometimes seems very codified. What are your opinions? That's a big one.
I'll leave to the film studies professor.
All right. Well, in terms of its evolution and where it is right now, I think the most interesting horror films are those that are actually commenting on the codification of horror cinema. So films like The Cabin in the Woods, You're Next, It Follows. These are movies that are pointing out just how kind of played out some of the conventions of horror films have become, and in the process are creating, new kinds of like more postmodern representations within the horror genre. So that really goes back to something like the Blair Witch Project in the 1990s, but even something like Paranormal Activity, I think in its use of, personal digital cameras and this kind of low budget surveillance aesthetic. That's a new kind of production design that we've seen within horror film too, rather recently.
Not to offend Alison, mise-en-scene is an academic term. You say that out in production and most of the people will have no idea what you're talking about. So get out production, unless they went to film school and then they go, oh yeah, I remember that part. So don't use it out in production, just as an idea. But to study films and things like that, it's wonderful. But when you step on that other side, you walk out those doors and you're working. If you start saying those things, they're gonna kind of think you're academic elitist, So.
Instead, you would call it art direction or production design.
Production value. Production value is really important. That's a key thing. Okay, I want to really get a lot of production value out of this. That's a key phrase to remember.
And read the room before you go.
Yeah, yeah. And just to kind of go, because I did my undergrad as film studies, and then I did my grad studies as an MFA in screenwriting. So I think I like to come at things from both sort of standpoints. I feel like I exist in this like nice sort of middle ground. Professor Parrish is absolutely right. When you're talking about things on set, you kind of want to avoid sort of overly academic terms. But if you're hanging out together, out of the way or something like that, and you have that academic approach, I think is generally okay. But as long as you're not like really approaching it, it's like, oh, the mise-en-scène is really off in this, blah, 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 then you don't want to do that. But for me as a screenwriter, like that film studies background has really helped me immensely to think about the way that I approach my films, and especially if I'm working like in a genre or like horror. I have written a horror film, or science fiction, or thrillers, or crime films, and things like that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think, sometimes when you think about sort of film studies in that respect when it comes to sort of production. So yeah, that's just my particular approach.
Yeah, I totally agree. But it helps you develop your story. It helps develop your film. That's all kind of internal. Mm-hmm. When you get out there to, the men and women that are sweating and setting the lights and, figuring out how they're going to get first in line for lunch, it's not what you talk about. Because you're going to talk about things like that and the ideas of it to your director, if you're the director, to the script writers, or you're talking to the cast and things like that. But we're getting off point here.
A Quiet Place was great. You should go see it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that yet.
You should go see it. It's great.
Shot on film stock.
Yeah.
Ooh. We have another question from Facebook from Julian with a specific sub-question for each of you. Professor Martinez, when working on an adaptation from a book or other media, what are typical constraints one may find when writing?
I would say the first one, whether it's either adapting or book, which I've been close to doing a couple times. I actually haven't done it yet, but I have written material based on true life experiences. So at least thinking about it from that perspective, like you have to consider how faithful you're staying to the quote unquote source material, while also making the sort of script, the story, its own thing. And so you also have to think about how do you retain the heart of the material away from what it originally was, because a lot of times people will be talking about films like, oh, it wasn't like the original book or blah, 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 blah. And it was like, well, the book is a very particular thing on its own. And the film tends to exist as a very particular thing on its own. And they can exist sort of, simultaneously without sort of jeopardizing whatever the heart is of that. In the true story adaptations I've done, you can include everything. You absolutely can't. Like, I've worked with some of my MFA students who've tried taking memoirs they've written and then try to adapt those into a screenplay, and it almost always ends in like some kind of frustration on their behalf, because they're so frustrated that they can't put everything that they want into the script. And like, you know, I love film, I love cinema, but it's very limited in terms of how much you can say and do in terms of that scope. Especially if you're a newer writer. If you have some experience, you can definitely, you know, you can do a lot. I mean, there's tons that you can do with it. But at least in terms of that adaptation, you can't include everything. You have to think about, you know, the split between dramatizing something and the truth of something. You have to do your research, whether that's just, you know, a combination of news material, research material that you find on the web or through articles you find, you know, in libraries or online or things like that, versus talking to actual people who live through it, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of working sort of cogs that you have to kind of think about when adapting material. So
yeah, what you were saying about of like people comparing them, and it seems like people forget often that they're two different mediums, and there's limitations to both.
Yeah, I mean, and just because a book adaptation into a film doesn't quite work in the same way that a book does, doesn't devalue the book in any way. Like, you can still read and love the book for what it is and for what it was, and still maybe criticize the film or love the film equally for different things that it does. So, yeah.
And for Professor Parrish, does it influence your cinematography in a specific way when working like from an adaptation?
No. A cinematographer takes his cue from the director. Whatever her vision is of the film, that's where the cinematographer jumps in to make that a reality. So it doesn't matter if it came from a book, it came from a napkin, or original script. Whatever the director's vision is, the cinematographer is going to try to make that happen on the screen.
Okay. And this one's for Professor Hoffman. Do you believe a movie adaptation has to strictly follow the original storyline, or is focusing on creating the same experience enough? What are some examples of good and bad adaptations, in your opinion, and why?
Well, kind of similar to what Professor Martinez was saying, since literature and film are totally different mediums, I think the response then to this question is, no. I really like this idea of adaptation as capturing the sensibility of the original text, as opposed to maintaining some kind of, fidelity or loyalty to the original text. So as long as that sensibility or essence of the original is there, that can take so many different kinds of forms in this, audiovisual medium that is cinema. So I'm tempted to say, there are no bad adaptations for that reason. And, I could only think of 2 adaptations that personally I thought were really horrible. The Lovely Bones being one.
Oh, I never read the book, but I remember seeing the movie. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on it? Why is that not a good adaptation?
Well, there's kind of a long story with that one. Originally, they were supposed to have a different director. I think Peter Jackson wound up directing The Lovely Bones, which was a real, maybe not the best choice since it's such a female story. Lynn Ramsay, a Scottish female director, was originally slotted to direct that movie, and I think that just would have been a much better choice, but for financial reasons that didn't happen. A really example of a great adaptation, I think, is Brokeback Mountain. which we read the short story and then watch the film, studying its production design and art direction in my Intro to Cinema class. That story is only 24 pages long, but the film is 2 hours and 14 minutes. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
How do you go from a 24-page short story to, this epic, 2 hour plus long film? Ang Lee, I think, does exactly that. He just captures the spirit and magnifies it, illuminates it, and turns it into this, true romance for the times.
So really examine the emotions and the character dynamics in it and just get into it and think about it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So moving on, this one's for Professor Parrish. Fix it in post. When do you know if something should be baked in or added in post?
That's an easy one. Depends on your budget. Ideally, you have the money if you're shooting digital, and you can shoot in RAW or log, which is preserving all the data that you can then manipulate later. If you end up having to shoot it in HD, all the camera stuff is kind of baked in at that point. Also, what you may be referring to is putting filters on, that sort of thing. Now in post, you can do a lot what the filters do on camera. But then again, it's time. Is there time and money to do much post, do color grading and that sort of thing? If you're shooting RAW or log, color grading is really important because you can do a lot with that, especially if you're doing HDR, where you've got all that scale colors and things to work with. But for lower budgets, it's the budget. Do you have time to do color grading at the end in post, or do you need to, in a sense, bake it in while you're shooting, which, is a legitimate way to do it if you don't have the money to do the post.
Okay, so it's just a balance and managing of your time and which one you prioritize.
Yeah, it's money. Yeah, preferably, if you had the time and money to do it, you'd do it all in post.
Okay. Really, all in post? Not in. You said do it all in post if you have the time.
Yeah. If you had the money, and you're shooting digital, you'd shoot RAW, and you'd have a lot of color grading time put in at the end to do it there. 'Cause especially there's a lot of deliverables out there now. You've got, you got DVDs, you got theater, you got HD, you've got, IMAX. There's a ton of different stuff out there. You got Netflix and Amazon and all those sort of things. So post is really important.
Okay. Well, this next one's for Professor Hoffman. Asians make up the largest movie-going audience. How can we get more Asian leads in big Hollywood films? And does HAPA, H-A-P-A, leads this matter?
Well, hire more Asians and Asian American actors is kind of the short answer. But also, in writing scripts, leave the ethnicity open. Right? So that when you're auditioning actors for those roles, it can really be anybody, right? That's sometimes referred to as blind casting, which, oftentimes people say they're doing blind casting, but they're really not. But to actually do it would certainly help. This goes back to something that Professor Martinez was saying earlier, too. In that same report out of USC, you learn that Asians and Latinos are actually the most underrepresented and invisible in, the top Hollywood films. So Asians were only, 5.7% of the cast in those 900 films, and Latinos only 3%, which is pretty shocking. In 2017, there were no Asian American leads in major films, yet white actors were cast in roles that were imagined for Asians, like Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell, Matt Damon in The Great Wall, and Tilda Swinton in Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
So this is an issue too. But trying to be hopeful, we can look to Kelly Marie Tran as Rose in Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of an interesting example of blind casting where, she auditioned for the role. They didn't necessarily imagine that character as, an Asian person,
Mm-hmm.
but she just nailed the part, right? And I was even thinking in response to this question about Chloe Kim and how, for the first time, it's amazing to see how she's been branded as this American hero, right? So that seems promising to me, even though that's in sports. I feel like, well, why can't we have a character like this
Mm-hmm.
in a major Hollywood film or, big budget television show? Kind of going back to something Professor Parrish was saying too about, not just focusing on mainstream Hollywood. I find it really encouraging to look at YouTube. And this is where so many of my students are getting most of their, media content these days. And even, my nephews who are 10 and 12, they don't watch TV or watch a lot of Hollywood films. They go on YouTube. And there's a ton of Asian American YouTubers out there making really incredible content. So I think the way that media is delivered is changing so much, and that's really going to determine, hopefully, in positive ways, the kinds of representations we see and will lead to greater inclusivity. The second question, which is about Hapa identity, which means mixed race, that's so important. Just some more statistics. 10% of American children now are mixed race, and by 2060, that is likely to be 30% of children in the U.S. will be mixed race. So we definitely need more Hapa representation and just mixed race representation.
Yeah, that's definitely
altogether
like a hard thing because they feel like they're stuck between two different cultures, and it's hard to identify with both as being a mixed person.
And again, you guys can change that.
This one is for Professor Martinez. How can we get more minority screenplays to go from script to screen?
So I think this is a good one because it's basically calling back to a lot of the discussion we've already had here, and write them, support them. Those are the two number one things. Go out there, write them, enter them into contests, make short films, create them, put them out there, get them out there. If you're not doing it, like I said before, someone else is. And most of my classes, screenwriting classes, I would say are usually 80 to 90% people of color, from various backgrounds, economically, ethnically, et cetera, and, I try to encourage as best I can those students to just write their stories. If you write your story and, produce it in some way, shape, or form and get it out there, people will come and see it, so write them, but support them. The more you watch films and TV shows by people of color, the more sort of Hollywood, as that generic sort of entity will respond to that, because they'll see that, people are watching, people are seeing these things, and so we should make more of that. If you watch things like On My Block, like I said, or Insecure, which is not made for someone like me, and I've seen the first season and love it. Fresh Off the Boat, Blackish, Black Lightning, A Better Life, Crazy Rich Asians, which comes out in the fall, Black Panther, obviously, which for some, made a ton of money. Go support all those things and show your support for them. But like I said, go and write them, create them, put them out there. So, yeah.
Another good Netflix show I've been watching from Spike Lee is She's Gotta Have It.
Yeah, which is based on his film. So,
are you ready to go in blind? We've got some questions from the live studio audience. This one's from Sade to Professor Parrish. what is some advice you can give to help develop your cinematic vision to captivate or to capture amazing shots?
I can get Alex to answer that one. You have to learn to see again. Now, Alex will know. I spent a lot of time on that. Every week we had to bring in photos, specific things. What I mean by seeing again, I'll try to make this short, is when we were born, we all had this creativity. We'd see things and notice things because we didn't know what they were. As we grow older, we kind of say, okay, that's a car, that's a door. I know how to walk through a door now, just push it and go. And you stop noticing things, you stop seeing things. What you have to do is you have to force yourself to learn to see again. Like I'm looking up here, we've got some lights that are on in the background, there's this poster up there, the sound panels up there, there's plugs back there, there's things, just to imagine this. When you get up tomorrow morning, look around your room and see things you didn't even notice were there. That's what the first exercise I have in my class is, and they said, well, there's a spider up in the corner. I haven't seen him, there's probably been there for months. Start purposely doing that. And then we eventually get to a point where we're seeing shapes, and we're seeing colors, and we're seeing patterns and compositions. Because what's really important for a cinematographer is we're working in a two-dimensional image, and even when it's a 3D movie, we're really working in a two-dimensional image, is you want to put depth in it. You can do that with foreground and background and shade and light and all those sort of things. But to be able to do that, you have to see it. And you can do that from the moment you wake up till you go to bed. It bugs my wife crazily sometimes because we'll be sitting in a restaurant or something over here and, move that way just 2 inches, you got better backlight, So you're always looking at that sort of thing. And it's practice every single day until you decide to be a banker. You just keep doing it. And that's how you get good at it. A professional football player, what do? They practice every day. They get really good. They practice 2 to 3 times a day. And then they go out and they play a game. Practice turns into play. When you're making a movie, you're having fun, you're playing, right? But you gotta practice, and that's how you get good. And that's how it'll make you, I said before, there's so many film schools in Southern California, so many film schools in the world. We can tell you about depth of field and exposure and all that stuff and composition, all that. They're all learning that stuff. But if you can learn to see again and be able to set your frames and your compositions, they're coming out of USC like this and you're coming out up here. And you can turn that into your movie. That's what you said about what do you do with a low budget movie? You don't have a lot of money, but you can frame things right. You can get composition, you get foreground in here. You can get movement of the camera. Little sliders are really cheap now on Amazon. Just a little bit of movement. Roger Deakins used that in Prisoner all the time. He started every scene with just a push, and they probably pushed in that much for 2 or 3 minutes. Hardly see it, but it really added to it. You can do that. What I really like to see in movement with my students too is blocking the actors. So maybe the camera maybe pan or a little bit or something, but the actors change and come around, and you may have an over like this and then they come around back this way, all in the one shot, and that's blocking that the director with the cinematographer can help do. And so you just build your vision, be able to see again. That's, I think, the most important thing.
So just focus on building a live world that's moving.
Yeah, you walk around and you think, okay, you're by these hedges. Okay, I'm doing a little dolly shot as I'm walking to the next class, and you can see that the perspective change, and that movement and that depth, But it's to make it work. You've got to do it and keep on doing it. Who's got a camera in their pocket? Everybody, right? There's no excuse not to do this. If you see something that's interesting, take a picture of it. When I was your age, I had a camera and it was film. Okay, 35 cents, 35 cents, 35 cents. Enough said, right? They can make movies. You can make everything. Can make movies. There's no. If this is really what you want to do with your life, this is really your passion. no excuse. You know, write, shoot, edit, every week, make a new movie. I know you don't have a lot of time, you're working and things like, but maybe stop watching TV or stay off social media, a little bit, or, because you are working for yourself to get to your dreams, and that's the pathway, is to practice, practice, practice.
I know for myself that sometimes keeps me from practicing is that idea that it needs to be perfect or exactly like what it in my head.
It's never perfect. That's one thing artists really have. Some artists have trouble with is, I can make it better. I'm the same way. I can make this better. I can make this better. I may, it could even be a term paper or something. If I format this a little bit, 2 hours later you've made a little change, and yeah, it is better, but did it make a difference? So I think for you guys, I really like to push the idea of, try to make a movie a week. Maybe it's only 2 minutes. Maybe it's a movie about how you put toothpaste on a toothbrush. Think of different perspectives with your iPhone camera, or things like that, and just do that. But it's important, write it down first. Write it down, do it storyboards, even if you're not very good at drawing, do little storyboards so you go in there and you're shooting off of your ideas. Be flexible, edit. You can edit on iPhones now. There's a lot of cheap and free edit, even if you have big time movies, DaVinci Resolve. It's top level. A lot of big movies being made of that. You can get that for free. So there's no excuse for, if you really have that passion, to go out there and between now and the end of summer, give me a reason why you can't have 20 movies on your phone.
Well, like what you're saying with got to keep making it better. What do you think is personally the best way to know when you're done? Is it like stylistically, or just be like, deadline, it's done, I can't look at it anymore?
The studios are going to give you a deadline. I think you want to go to a point where you're making little incremental changes. If it's the big thing, if that's going to get you a big project, then maybe you want to take the time to perfect that a little bit. But if it's just, this is your little film, you probably aren't going to show it to anybody, who knows? You've learned what you wanted to learn from that, then it's time to move on. Maybe, 2 or 3 weeks later, you said, maybe this would be really nice. And maybe reshoot a little scene and cut it in or something. But what's important is to keep practicing and to do different things. Like I talked about, making a character off of somebody on the bus or something like that. Do all these little guys. Make these people that you imagine in your vision come to life. And they do some with a sign. There's little simple things. You animate this water coming around. Just little things like that. Do that. Move on.
And adding to that, Professor Martinez, I know you say like revision is key in screenwriting. So how do you know when you're done with that too, or like too many revisions?
You're never done.
Mm-hmm.
No, one of the, as you know, and some of my other former students know here, like one of the things that I like to tell my students is that the vision that you have of the story, of the script in your mind is perfect. It's the perfect version, and it's the only perfect version that's going to exist. Because the minute you start to put a word on the page, on the blank screen, every word is a compromise. Every word is a compromise against that perfect vision that it only exists in your mind. So you, at least as a writer, from that perspective, you have to make peace with that, because it's never going to be that perfect. But the more you study, the better you get at your craft, and the more you write and create new and different things, the better you'll get there, and the better your stories will get. And so hopefully one day you'll have people responding to your stories in this really great way, So yeah, I mean, it's as far as the revisions are concerned, I mean, you're gonna, at least in my, indie film experience and the foreign films that I've made and stuff like that, like, you're constantly going to get notes. You're constantly going to get notes from whether it's the producers or the director or, an actor or whoever has some say in that process. And you have to kind of know when to pick your battles, but also be okay with that, because you're gonna be rewriting a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of one of the plain sort of simple truths of being a writer, especially in film, because it's a collaboration. Movies don't get made completely by themselves unless you're like Robert Rodriguez, like you really need to sort of just, be succinct with that and sort of be okay with the fact that you're going to revise a lot and you're going to rewrite a lot. So,
okay. So just expect it part of the process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And once you get into production, it's a collaborative thing. You talk with your actors, you talk with your cinematographer, your set dressers, production design, and that's when the magic happens. It's just not you anymore. Your idea has gotten a life. Yeah. And other people are going to make that better. And what's really important as a cinematographer and as a director and as a producer, I find, is to share this with everyone. Mm-hmm. Let them all know how important they are to getting this story to the screen. And then it becomes theirs. And they will work their butt off for you. Yeah. Even the lowest, the craft service person or something. We just shot this today and it was really great, and thanks for being part of us, if you're just, coming from school or something, you're a craft service or a PA or something, and somebody tells you that from the production, that makes you feel good. That makes you feel part of the production. So, as you move yourself up in up to the director or whatever you want to be, or actor or writer, remember that this collaboration is where the magic happens.
Yep. Absolutely.
This question is from Malin for Martinez. How would someone new to college start their path towards becoming a screenwriter? What type of classes should you take?
Intro to screenwriting. Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in being a screenwriter and you want to take screenwriting classes, obviously, but at the same time, I would encourage those students to take a film studies class, to take a cinematography class, to take an editing class, and a filmmaking class in general, so you learn all the different sort of things that people do on a set, and so that you have some of that experience and some of that knowledge sort of going in, but then obviously take English classes, take screenwriting classes, take creative writing classes, and read a ton, like not just the books that your professors assign to you, but you absolutely have to read for pleasure. And if you're not doing that, you're failing as a writer. Like, you absolutely have to do that. And on top of that, if you're only reading books and scripts by people who look just like you, you're doing it wrong. Because as a writer, you have to write from a diverse array of voices. Oftentimes you'll be asked to write a 30-year-old white woman. I'm not a 30-year-old white woman, but I have to sort of embody that as a writer from time to time. And you just have to be able to put yourself in as many different shoes, perspectives, sensibilities as you can. So, yeah.
So take as much as you can in.
Yeah, learn. It's constantly doing homework. You're constantly learning. You have to be a sponge and learn to love it. If you don't, learn to love it. And if you love it, then you're unstoppable, I think, at that point.
So this is the last question. This one's from Alex, and this is for all of you. What do you think about test audiences and their control over the creative process? I've got another one.
I guess it's important to producers. It depends on how much control the director has, how much control the story has. I don't know, it's sometimes you can't get the right answers from the test audiences, you know. But you know, they obviously, the producers or whatever feel that they're useful. But yeah, I think it's too late in the process for myself. But it may help them decide where to market the film first, maybe, or how to work on their advertising and marketing, because it's really important to, you know, get that initial response from the audience, and we all know what Rotten Tomatoes can do or do for and against a movie. So it's a whole political thing happening there. Is that okay, Alex?
On my first feature as a super indie film that I did forever ago, we actually tested it at some theater over in Calabasas, because like we had a new production company come aboard and they wanted to like get some outside insight into sort of the film, because we were going to do some reshoots. So I think from that perspective, like it was really beneficial, because we were able to see what was working, what wasn't working, and then eventually the editor that we hired, who was like this top name editor, came aboard, and he was able to offer some insight based off of some of that feedback that we got from the audience. And obviously we didn't take everything, and we're a super low budget film, but it was really helpful, at least from that perspective, you know. And you know, I can't really speak to how bigger budget Hollywood, you know, blockbusters do it, but at least from that smaller perspective, it was definitely helpful. But at the same time, you have to know when to sort of, you know, kind of distance yourself from some of that, because you definitely don't want that many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So
yeah, I think it would be useful for you guys if you're having a, you know, especially a first-time film or early, and just because once you start doing a film, you live with it and you understand it, and it makes sense. Okay, this person's reaching in to grab this shirt out. Why are they grabbing that shirt out? Because it's got the blood stain and they have to hide it. But if you don't photograph it so you see the blood stain and all that, you already know that that's why they're taking it out. But the audience doesn't know that if you haven't shown that to them. So sometimes getting those fresh eyes to look at your story and how you're presenting it will help you out to, oh yeah, we should show the blood stain, you know. But so it's helpful there, because once you start making it, you start writing it, you understand everything. You understand the backstory, you know, but the audience doesn't necessarily do that, because they only know what we show them, put them in that little rectangle.
That is interesting to think about, how test audiences could perhaps open up a space for reimagining a film, right? Reimagining, I would imagine, endings more than anything else.
This is a funny thing. On that first feature, there's this film called Beyond the Mat that I did. Like, the first cut of the film, we didn't have this antagonistic character that was eventually added after the fact. Like, during our reshoots, we completely added this new quote-unquote evil coach character because of some of the responses that we got during that test screening and stuff. And we actually ended up getting Kurt Angle, this WWE wrestler and MMA guy, to come out and play that coach. And he was completely added after the fact. And having him in the film really did make the film better. So yeah, so some things like that can happen. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I'd just like to thank everyone. Thank our faculty members, Professor Martinez, Professor Hoffman, and Professor Parrish, taking your time to share your knowledge today and your experience. We've learned quite a lot. Are there any upcoming events you'd like to promote, projects that you're working on you'd like to share with us, or future classes that you'll be teaching?
Well, I just want to thank you, first of all. You've been wonderful. And also to just give a huge shout out to the film club here at LBCC who hosted this event. You all have just done an incredible job with this. It's been so professional. I want to encourage all the students who are here to join the film club. which I think is one of the most exciting things going on here at LBCC. And then also just to really look at all the classes we offer here, from intro to screenwriting, cinematography, intro to digital filmmaking, film genres, film directors and artists. We have quite the curriculum, which, you know, dives into, I think, all the questions that we've really worked through here today.
And I'd like to thank the audience. I am looking forward to seeing your movies. You are the future. Alex, what do we always say at the end of the class? Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. Seize the day. So I'm teaching 2 intro to screenwriting sections in the fall, one on Monday night, one on Wednesday night. So I highly encourage everyone who's watching or in the audience to come and sign up. If you're at all curious, it's very writing intensive, and then definitely look to your film club people, because I've had a lot of them in my classes before. So join the film club, because one of the number one things I get from my students asking me is like, how do we make movies? How do we get things out there? How do we do stuff? Join the film club. Like, there's a ton of like-minded people there who want to do the same thing as you. So that's probably one of the sort of best ways to kind of get involved. And I'm writing a script right now following the lead of one of our faculty, Eli Dodrell, that I'm hoping to shoot maybe next year on a lower budget. So there could be hopefully some opportunities for some LBCC students to intern on that down the road. I'm still in the very early stages of that, but that definitely looks like something that could happen about hopefully next year or sometime thereafter. So, yeah.
Yeah, and work together.
Yeah.
You know, that's where the magic happens.
Great. Well, thank you, studio audience. I hope we've answered all of your questions and found some valuable advice today. So please give our panelists and yourselves a round of applause. And I'd just like to thank the crew, our director, Nadine, our stage manager, Sarah, camera, Alex, Gina, and Brent, and Christian over in the PA, and audio, Irvin and J.D.A., and streaming moderator, Crystal, and film club PA, Matt, and our film club advisor, Alison Hoffman. And additional thanks to Erik Knorr and Linus Lau. Thank you. There's going to be a reception in the other room where there's pizza and sandwiches and what else do they got there? Salads. So please join us. Oh, thank you.